Okay.
So Terri, I'll just get back. Can you just introduce yourself?
Okay. Hi, my name is Terri Byers. I'm Canadian-British, and I do research on sport organizations and management.
Can you tell me a little bit about your research interests?
Sure. Research-wise, I'm interested in community sport organizations primarily. How they're managed, the difficulties that they have, volunteering, how best to manage volunteers. My research has extended into legacy of mega events and how our mega events, particularly sporting events like the Olympics, doesn't have the desired legacy for sport at the community level. And I had quite a lengthy project start in the UK 4 years ago that just finished, looking at that across the globe.
What can we learn, or what would be some of the applications of that research?
Some of that research tells us that the way we manage sport and sport governance is very professional, and we try and make everything more professional, but at the community level we don't have the resources to operate like big organizations. So I work with a lot of community organizations to try and find other ways of operating than trying to emulate big professional organizations that have a lot of resources. So it is really helping them manage volunteers more efficiently, to think more strategically and long-term about the way they operate, and not chasing commercial aspects of sport.
Okay, and are there any particular research projects that you're working on currently that would...
At the moment, we're interviewing a lot of sport clubs on innovation, asking them what innovative practices they have to increase participation in sport. We know that a lot of the statistics globally show us that participation in sport organizations is declining, and that trend has been happening for years. And everything that we do to try and professionalize our operations is with the intent that we will have more efficient organizations. Well, it's having the opposite effect. It's driving volunteers away. It's making kids very unhappy because they don't want necessarily to be an Olympic athlete. They just want to participate. And everything that we do to help them participate seems to be having the adverse effect. So we're going around New Brunswick and having some focus groups and some interviews with clubs to see what challenges they see in increasing participation and what they do internally to try and address that. The project started with some researchers in Germany at the University of Munich, and they've also done this sort of research. So we've done a Canada-wide survey to clubs and try and find out if there's similar things happening as in Germany.
So would you say your research methodology is a lot of, I guess, surveying and interviewing?
I do a lot of mixed methods, so I do some surveys, but I also do interviews, focus groups. My research tends to be of a critical realist framework, which is a bit daunting sometimes for a master's student, but certainly PhD students get into that and enjoy. It's a very eclectic methodology. So students come and usually learn about that with me. There's not a lot of other faculty that are using that methodology, and it allows students to experience a mix of qualitative and quantitative.
So if your research is successful, you would see a greater participation in sport at all levels. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, some of my research is around governance as well, so it's not just about increasing participation. What I've learned over the last few years working in New Brunswick is a lot of organizations aren't trying to increase participation. The government and policymakers are saying we need to increase participation for all of the health and economic benefits. But clubs and provincial sport organizations are saying they haven't got the facilities, the ice time, the resources to take on any more participants. So there's some work to be done around just helping these organizations manage and sustain what they have, and maybe increase satisfaction with participation and to create participation for a longer period of one's life, but not necessarily to increase participation.
Great. I have one other question. What got you interested in this particular line?
I read that question and I thought about it for days.
Well, I don't even know that it'll go in. I'm just
Yeah. I've always had an interest in sport, and I think it was through my undergraduate degree. You know, I went in thinking I was going to be a physical education teacher, and what you find out when you get to university is there's lots of other jobs to do. So I happened to come across a professor who was interested in sport management and invited me to go to school in England. So when I went there, I was exposed to a whole new system of sport and recreation and that sort of thing. And just working with that professor, I became more and more interested in the community level sport. I realized everybody was quite interested in professional sport and commercial sport. He encouraged a very critical perspective of sport, which I think I still do. And when you do that, you realize you start to question the way we manage things. So that's my interest, I guess, was always in sport. But then I went to England outside of the, you know, what I was used to in a culture I was not used to, and saw sport from a whole different perspective. And I now try and send my students all over the world. So I get a graduate student, I've got one going to Ireland in January. I had 2 go to South Africa last year, 1 go to Sweden. I just think that experience and that perspective gives them, you know, new options that they didn't think about in the first place.
Very nice. Can I get you to introduce yourself again?
Mm-hmm.
Don't say hi, but say, my name is Terri Byers. I'm professor of kinesiology.
Right, yep. My name is Terri Byers. I'm an associate professor in kinesiology at the University of New Brunswick.
Great. And then one more time saying something about your interest being in sports management.
My research and teaching is in sport and recreation management. I specifically look at sport organizations and try and do research and help my students do research that improves the operation and performance of those organizations.
Nice. Is there anything you want to say that you haven't said?
I don't think so.
I think that was very linear, and I think
yeah.
it was a very easy one to ask.
I think in terms of the students looking at it, it's that international stuff. Like I try and.
That part was really interesting. I'm wondering if there's a way we could segue into that. You could say maybe something about how my time abroad really informed my research, and so now I try to give that opportunity. Something to that effect?
Yeah. I went to England to do my master's, and I stayed on there after I finished to do a PhD, and I think that international experience really influenced me. From England, I was able to travel to a lot of different countries, experience sport and recreation from a different cultural perspective, and that really influences me to encourage my students to do that. So I have a lot of international connections, and we, sorry, they lost my train of thought.
We're going to do that part again, I think.
Yeah.
It's too noisy. Okay. Quiet on this side. Yeah, if you just want to say that one part again about just, you know, it doesn't have to be long, just about how it really excited you to see things from a different perspective, and now you encourage your students to do this.
So traveling outside of Canada to study and do research really encouraged me to see things from a different perspective and different culture. I really try and encourage my students to do that, so I use my network and former connections in industry and academia to set my students up with projects, usually 3 or 4 months, where they go abroad, engage in some kind of activity, whether it's helping an organization with sponsorship or organizing events, or doing a research project on increasing participation, the governance of an organization. And I think that really helps them understand sport from a different perspective as well. I've got a number of students going. One student next year is going to the Zimbabwe Special Olympics, and he's helping them with fundraising, with sponsorship and marketing packages. another student going to Ireland, and one staying at home in Canada going to the Ottawa Senators. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Anything else? I think that.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Nice little piece from that. Thanks for taking the time to do that. Anything else you want?
I will get to have a look at it before.
Oh, yeah. Always.
Awesome.
Always. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just get that mic from you.
Yep.
Bring this